Tonight on CFTK-TV, the Northwest Flood Watch has upgraded to a warning. BC prepares for relations with a change in the U.S. head office, and Canadians find themselves stuck in Cuba after Hurricane Raphael.
Northwest BC's only television news team. We are CFTK-TV News.
Hello, I'm Damian Smith, and thank you for joining us here on CFTK-TV. Well, the River Forecast Center has upgraded the flood watch to a flood warning for the North Coast, including the Nass River and other surrounding areas around Stewart, Terrace, Prince Rupert, Kitimat, and other coastal communities. And Jaylene Matthews from CFTK-TV has more of the details.
A flood warning is in effect for the North Coast. That means that river levels have or will exceed bank full, and that flooding of areas adjacent will result. The River Forecast Center says it's an atmospheric river that has affected the area this week, with rainfall expected to taper soon.
The BC River Forecast Center says that along with the heavy rain, warmer temperatures have caused snowmelt on the mountains, which has resulted in rising waters.
Rivers are said to have been rapidly rising since Wednesday. Current flow conditions around Kitimat, Terrace, Nuayanch, and surrounding areas have been elevated, with flows in the 2 to 10 year flow range. The high waters have affected access to parks, with Kitimat closing access to several.
And as you can see here behind me, where we would typically have a large beach area, the water has risen and is almost completely flooded out.
The district of Kitimat has also issued a boil water notice to residents due to the flow. To safely consume, that water must be boiled for at least 60 seconds. For information on how to prepare for flood hazards, visit Prepared BC for emergency guides and resources. The River Forecast Center warns that fast-flowing rivers can pose an increased risk to safety. The public is advised to stay clear of the fast-flowing rivers. For CFTK-TV News, I'm Jaylene Matthews.
And the Kitimat RCMP put out their weekly report for the days of October 31st to November 6th, where they had 4 different categories of reports. The region had a report of a possible intoxicated driver near 3 a.m. on October 31st, an egg thrown at a window on November 1st, 2 false calls to 911 from the White Sail neighborhood, and 2 separate instances of impaired drivers who were given roadside suspensions for 90 days. Now we're in the middle of a standoff in labor disputes where hundreds of foremen are expected to continue their strike against the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. Craig Krause from CTV has more on this developing story.
After days of silence and negotiations between the two sides, we are hearing from the union, and what they're telling us is that they filed a labor practice complaint against their employer, accusing them of intimidation and bargaining in bad faith. And you can see over my shoulder right now, there are some employees in that tent. And one of the key sticking points for them is automation taking jobs. And I asked the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority about this today. Take a listen to what they had to say.
So investments of all types are really what we're trying to encourage. Some of that brings new technology. We don't want to be opposed to that. We recognize there's a human impact to some of that, but this is the balance that we need to strike in the country for us to continue to sustain our standard of living through trade.
This all comes as Federal Labor Minister Stephen McKinnon came out on Thursday saying there was a concerning lack of urgency and urged both parties to reach agreements quickly, calling it an insufficient pace. But a major sticking point, like I mentioned, is automation of eliminating union jobs, a situation BC has faced for many decades.
Something that the parties have had to deal with for longer than most of your viewers have been alive, and they'll continue to do so in the future.
Thompson says both sides are playing hardball. As the employer stated, the final offer is on the table. And with this, the BCMEA says that there will be no concessions in this final offer, and it will be on the table until withdrawn. Now the business community across Vancouver and really across the province are waiting to see what happens next. Craig Crowe, CTV News, Vancouver.
Well, the Smithers Art Gallery is facing the closure of the Creation Station, where the town sent the gallery a letter on Halloween where they will have the Railway Avenue lease until August. During the Smithers Committee of the Whole meeting on Wednesday night, manager Nicole Chernish brought up concerns to the council about what losing the space could mean, and this topic will return to the council this upcoming Tuesday, as the gallery is looking to alternate options if the town does not renew the lease while programs continue to run. With Donald Trump winning the presidency this week, BC is preparing for the change in office that will be happening south of the border. And here's Robert Buffum of CTV.
On the heels of Donald Trump's resounding win, BC Conservative leader John Rustad says the change of government there could be positive for British Columbia.
I'm hopeful that with a win with Trump, it's going to change a couple of things.
While Trump has threatened to impose 10% tariffs across the board for imports of all goods, Rustad points to 15% tariffs scheduled to increase already in place on softwood lumber and not renegotiated by Biden's administration that are hurting BC's forestry sector.
Trump is a deal maker. Hopefully it gives us an opportunity to be able to do a deal with the Americans, and I think that should be a priority for our government. We have to be looking at how we protect our forest sector, and I think, quite frankly, both federally and provincially, they've ignored it.
He also notes Trump has said he'd remove electric vehicle mandates and emission targets. Rustad thinks BC should do the same and get rid of zero-emission targets for new vehicles.
By 2030, with these mandates in place, the low-end vehicles are going to be taken off the market. People are going to have to pay significantly more to buy a vehicle in British Columbia. And how's that helping the average everyday person who's struggling to put food on the table and pay for the rent?
That appeal to day-to-day financial realities and backlash to government intervention central to Trump's victory, and the growing popularity of conservative movements in BC and Canada, says this political scientist.
The unifying principle here, what brings these three very disparate kind of politics and parties together is the magic ingredient that is populism.
Known for bluster and being unpredictable, we won't know Trump's plans for electric vehicles or tariffs until he's sworn in January 20th. But planning north of the border has already begun.
Robert Buffum, CTV News.
Coming up next, Hurricane Raphael knocks out the power in Cuba with thousands of Canadians stuck. Welcome back. Well, Cuba is in the middle of a Category 3 hurricane in Hurricane Raphael as the island is struggling to vitalize its power. Here's Adrian Gabriel of CTV News.
The weight of heavy winds leaning on Cuba's capital, simply too much, leaving the island nation's 10 million people submerged in darkness as the national electrical grid collapsed for a second time in as many months. As the sun rose this morning, some were forced to traverse a precarious commute with dangerous power lines snaked across roadways. Havana's aging infrastructure no match for Hurricane Raphael's Category 3 gusts that pulled some homes apart brick by brick. This man saying, "What worries me is my life and where I am going to live." Global Affairs Canada says 1,715 Canadians are registered in Cuba, but that number is believed to be much higher.
There is no electricity. Our hotel sanctuary has zero, only generators for the little office. We have no lights on our stairs. There's nothing in your room, no air conditioning, no hot water.
Canadians Allison and Max Drenko consider themselves to be fortunate to be staying in Veradero, which was spared from the worst of Raphael's wrath, though there's no timeline for when power could be restored to their resort.
We really don't know if this means it could be days before we get hydro.
Back in Havana, Raphael's devastating blow didn't claim any lives, though it was a gut punch for a country still pulling itself together following a separate hurricane that hit just weeks earlier.
Hurricane Raphael is expected to weaken as it spins over the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, though there's still some uncertainty about the path the storm may track in the days ahead.
And 112 years ago, the Titanic sank, and now a new artifact has popped up in the Atlantic and will be available for auction over in England. Here's Paul Hollingsworth in Halifax.
Postmarked at 3:45 p.m., April 11th, 1912, this postcard was sent by Richard William Smith, a first-class passenger on the Titanic. His note to Olive Dakin, who lived in England, included the line, "Just leaving for the land of stars and stripes." It was just 3 days before the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank in the North Atlantic.
That's a piece of living history almost.
On the second day of the voyage, the Titanic stopped at Queenstown, Ireland to pick up passengers, and that was when the postcard was likely sent. It will soon be sold to the highest bidder at an auction house in England.
A little thing like an auction all of a sudden brings it back, and you see a person behind the story.
Historian Blair Bede says this is a tangible piece of history that fuels the never-ending public fascination with the Titanic.
Immediately, I think of the post workers on board Titanic who were actually bringing mail up as the ship was sinking.
Richard William Smith was one of the more than 1,500 people who died when the Titanic sank. The postcard has attracted a lot of global attention, especially in Halifax, where the Titanic recovery effort was based and more than 150 victims were buried.
We have a real anchor in the history of Titanic here.
The auction will take place on November 16th. The postcard is expected to fetch roughly £10,000, more than $18,000 Canadian. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
And turning to tonight's forecast, the Prince Rupert area will be cloudy with a 30% chance of showers. Winds will be coming from the southeast at 20 kilometers per hour, increasing to 40 at times. And the low will be 4 degrees. In the Terrace and Kitimat region, we'll also see mainly cloudy conditions with fog patches developing sometime before morning, and there will be a low of +1. And finally, in the Bulkley Valley and Lakes District, it should have clear conditions tonight with fog patches developing in the evening. Winds coming from the southwest at 20 kilometers per hour, increasing to 40 at times, along with a low of -10, and the wind chill will be -7. And now on to your weekly weather forecast. The coast should see steady temperatures with clouds and rain throughout the week. The high will be 9 degrees on Sunday and the low will be 2 degrees on Wednesday night. The Terrace and Kitimat region should have some sun tomorrow, but then chances of snow throughout the week. However, don't expect the rain to go away. The high will be 5 degrees on Tuesday during the rainy day, while the low will be 0 degrees on Saturday and Tuesday night. And in the Bulkley Valley and Lakes District, expect to see the same pattern but with a little bit more snow, and the high will be 3 degrees on Tuesday and the low will be -7 on Saturday night. And now on to your Northwest Roadside report, where the report seems to be a little bit lighter than usual. On Highway 16, there are fog patches and flooding west of Terrace. There's utility work west of Fraser Lake and utility work in Vanderhoof. On Highway 37, there are fog patches and slippery sections for the entire length. On the Nishka Highway, there are fog patches, construction west of New Ayanch. And now let's take a look at the cameras from around the Northwest. Still to come, the avian flu still continues to be a heavy challenge for Canadian farmers. Welcome back. Well, we've had our fair share of rain recently here in the Northwest, but the same cannot be said about south of the border down in Southern California. And thousands of residents near the Los Angeles region are now in the midst of evacuating the area. Here's Matt Gutman of ABC News.
This morning, Ventura County under a state of emergency as the so-called mountain fire west of Los Angeles exploded in size.
The fire is still very dangerous. The winds have not completely deceased.
The mountain fire growing to over 20,000 acres in just 36 hours. Lower winds late Thursday allowing firefighters and fleets of helicopters to pour resources on hotspots.
You see this helicopter trying to put out that spot fire. It is flying incredibly low, just about 30 or 40 feet off the deck, and it's being buffeted by the wind. They're trying to help out the hundreds of firefighters on the ground here in Ventura County, California. The embers are flying. Weather conditions, however, expected to improve here.
But at one point early on, the fire turbocharged by hurricane-force Santa Ana winds, burning 2,000 acres an hour.
It's like trying to put out a blowtorch with a squirt gun.
Reports of people trapped, inundating police scanners.
I'm up here with them, trying to get them out, but it's heavily impacted by fire at this time. We're going to have numerous fatalities in here if we don't have companies engaged.
Over 200 structures, mostly homes, destroyed or damaged, thousands more at risk. And more than 14,000 people under evacuation orders. Thursday, residents like 81-year-old Jan trying to salvage something from the ashes. She and her husband had spent over 60 years in what had been a 3-story home.
My husband is blind, and I'm responsible for him. So all I wanted to think was get him in the car, get him out, and I just was in action. I mean, I haven't cried yet.
Well, farmers in Canada have had their fair share of challenges over the years, especially with an avian flu outbreak a couple of years ago. And this has made many farmers find the need to rebuild, where many Canadians still depend on them. Here's Allison Bamford in Saskatoon.
The barns on this Saskatchewan turkey farm looked very different around this time 2 years ago.
It's devastating. It's quite a shock.
Jelmer Wiersma's operation was one of more than 400 Canadian poultry farms infected by the highly contagious avian flu. His entire flock had to be euthanized, nearly 90,000 birds.
It's a sense of relief. At least they're not suffering anymore.
It's been the largest animal health emergency that this country has ever had to face.
Since December 2021, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has destroyed more than 11 million birds impacted by the virus. Documents obtained through an access to information request by advocacy group Animal Justice show CFIA's resources spread thin trying to respond at the height of the outbreak. The agency spent millions hiring third-party contractors to assist.
We just haven't built in surge capacity at these agencies.
In some cases, those private companies didn't follow the biosecurity measures in place to curb the spread. Other times, the CFIA ran out of carbon dioxide used to euthanize birds and had to consider less preferred methods.
Many of those birds had to be manually killed, which likely means having their neck snapped.
The agency has since secured a steady supply of CO2 and is confident in its outbreak response.
And like anything that you do many times and become more proficient at it, you become more effective.
Back on the farm, it's business as usual for Wiersma, who managed to rebuild his flock.
You do things properly, and then hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Infection rates dropped drastically since the first wave. As of this week, there are only 16 active infections in the country, almost all in BC. The CFIA continues surveillance not only for the poultry industry, but now cattle, after American dairy cows tested positive for the virus earlier this year, something Canadian cows haven't seen yet. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
And now we turn our attention to the stock market, where we have a little mix of everything today. The Canadian dollar is down 0.2 cents. The price of gold is down $11.70. Oil is down $2.08. Natural gas is up 2 cents. Aluminum is up 103. In Toronto, the TSX is down 86.5 points. The Venture Index is down 4 points. In New York, the Dow Jones is up 259 and NASDAQ is up 17.3. Still ahead, we get a glimpse of a memorial of a family of brothers who fought for Canada. Welcome back. Well, wild horses in Alberta are now diminishing, and for those who are taking care of them are being told to let them go. However, those caretakers highly disagree. Now on to Kathy Lee with CTV.
Time seems to slow down here, the quiet only broken by the sound of their soft hooves.
We've got 4 here right now that were rescues.
This ranch, a sanctuary for some of Alberta's wild horses. For 400 years, the species has been roaming free, almost 1,500 across Alberta, but now the province says some need to go.
You silly boy.
Daryl Glover disagrees.
The numbers are getting very low for a sustainability of a unique species.
The province ordered a wild horse cull a decade ago when there were 880. Glover has been advocating to save them since.
They said that they were all full of EIA, equine infectious anemia. We proved that wrong. Then they went to the numbers were skyrocketing. We proved that wrong. Then they went to the horses are damaging the landscape. We've proved that wrong.
A 2015 range health report found wild horses actually caused little damage to the land. Most of it was caused by clear-cut logging, off-road vehicles, and cattle.
They should be focusing on restoring the health from the cumulative effects, not just scapegoating wild horses.
The province maintains it's considering all factors that impact the land. Still, it plans to thin the herd again after doubling in a decade.
At this time, there is no cull.
But based on what it calls a science-based management framework, once a population reaches a threshold, the province will reduce it through horse adoption and birth control.
But now it's time to implement some of those because those thresholds have been met.
By using a contraception and preventing birth, as far as we're concerned, that's going to lead to equine genocide.
Glover is determined to not let that happen, so these animals can keep wandering the landscape for hundreds of years to come. Kathy Lee, CTV News, near Olds, Alberta.
As we are now 3 days away from Remembrance Day, we're seeing many monuments around the country to honor those who fought, and even a memorial of a family of brothers who fought for Canada. Once again, here's Paul Hollingsworth of CTV News.
Across Canada, Remembrance Day is a time to honor the men and women who died in battle while serving our country.
It's the most important day of the year.
In the small Nova Scotia community of Knoll, this marble and granite monument stands tall to honor the 8 sons of Richard and Sarah Harvey who grew up nearby. All 8 brothers fought for their country in the Second World War.
Being a parent myself and having 8 children go overseas, to fight in a war, just mind-boggling.
Garnet Harvey, who was wounded on D-Day, has his name etched in stone, a reminder of his heroic service that was quietly celebrated but rarely discussed in the Harvey household.
You didn't hear much about it. I remember being shown his scars from the war. Probably I was about 9 or 10.
The 8 brothers are believed to be the most siblings from one family in North America or the British Commonwealth to serve in the Second World War. Jeff Thurber led a fundraising campaign to help erect this memorial structure.
The whole monument, the flags, the banners, everything was done through community and fellow legions.
This monument captures a special chapter in Nova Scotia history, but it also serves as a sad reminder. The 8 brothers are no longer alive. 6 returned from the war. 2 were killed in action.
The 2 on the top, Marvin and Burl, they made the ultimate sacrifice.
For the Harvey family that still has deep roots in this area, it's a meaningful tribute.
Oh, man. Fantastic.
An opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate the extraordinary contributions of the 8 Harvey brothers who did their country, province, and family proud. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Knoll, Nova Scotia.
And that will be all for tonight's cast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good night.